So we've got a Troy-Bilt generator here, customer brought in, says that it won't start, and if it starts it won't stay running. So battery was dead when it came in. I went ahead and replaced the battery. He says that it has a newer carb on it. It looks like it does for sure. This is the Troy-Bilt model 01925. Pretty nice unit in my opinion. It's got the nice Briggs engine on it, which is a lot better than they put on a lot of these things. But the problem is this carburetor, the Nikki carburetor that so many of these things have, they're just junk. Now this one is newer, it's an aftermarket carb, it looks like no markings or anything on it. It is very well the same on many of these Briggs and Stratton units. Now this is a Walbro version of those carburetors, which is what we like to use to replace them if we do any replacements on them. Now they put these on a lot of different things. This is Ruexing or whatever, however you want to pronounce it, that was replaced off of something at some point. This is a Nikki, just off of one of these aftermarket something here that's Nikki design. You can tell it's the Nikki design because it's got the two bolts holding the bottom of the bowl on, as opposed to just the one bolt on the Walbro style that holds the whole bowl on. Now these are the same carburetors that are on many different units. Troy-Bilt. This Power-Bilt engine, which is just made by Briggs and Stratton. This one has a Walbro style on it. We got Arian's 19.5 horse here. Yep, so it's got a Nikki style on it. Got the Nikki style carb. Now that one seems to run halfway decent when it's fired up. Does surge pretty bad from the get-go, but it does come out of it. We got another Troy-Bilt. I think we actually put this Walbro style carburetor on. And then we've got this Toro. It's also got the Briggs and Stratton engine that has the same type carburetor on it. So that's got a Nikki carb right there, you can see. And then let's see here, what else do we have? We've got a Boland's and a Husqvarna right over here. They both have the same carburetors also. So I get asked this all the time with these carburetors. People say, oh, I put a new carb on, this thing doesn't run right. Well, what's their problem? I'll show you exactly what that is. It's got a Nikki on this Husqvarna also. John Deere puts them on a lot of their 100 series tractors. That L120 over there has got a bigger engine on it, but so many of these things have those same carburetors on them, and there's slight variations and not much. The choke plate varies on a lot of them, just how much air they block off when they choke. See here, this one's got like 6 holes in it. That one's only got 2, and I think that's probably why we stole the choke plate out of this if we replaced it with a carb. On these Nikki carburetors, the problem is they have a main jet in them that's just extremely, extremely bad. So I'll get a good design here and show you, or good view here and show you exactly why this design fails and why it's not good. I don't know if I can get that to lock in there. There we go. Go ahead and open this thing up real quick. These screws never want to open with just a regular screwdriver. You almost always have to start them with a big old pair of vice grips or pliers of some sort. Otherwise, all you're going to do is strip them out. They'll never come out of there. So on these carburetors, the aftermarkets, they come and they're just really, really poorly designed. Now the Nikki's a poor design in general, in my opinion. So your main jet's right through there. The problem with that is that main jet, it seals to the outside of the plastic here with just a tiny, tiny little thin O-ring. See if I can't get something to work that out. So there's a tiny, tiny little O-ring on the outside here. Now this one's completely flattened out real bad, but this O-ring is what seals it to the outside, and if there's any kind of void there, then it'll create an air leak for your main jet and won't run right. Also, that jet travels straight up through here and it seals around to all these gaskets all the way around the inside of that jet. So all the way around here, if there's any leak in that whatsoever, your unit's not going to run right. It's going to pull air, it's going to have an air leak. Also, on the inlet coming in around here, if that O-ring doesn't seal right, you're going to have an issue with it flowing into your crankcase. We see that a ton. So it's just a horrible design in my opinion. Most of the aftermarket carburetors, this jet here has an O-ring that sits at the bottom and it actually just presses down in, and that does not work right. It does not create an airtight seal, and they have an air leak right out of the box. So you don't want to use those whatsoever. You want to replace it with a Walbro style carburetor. Now, no matter what model of engine or anything you're looking at, this Walbro carburetor here can replace that. Now, I do like to take the old choke plate out, if it's the original choke plate, and go ahead and put it in here just so you have the same choking as the original one did before. Now, if your new carburetor doesn't have a fuel shutoff, you can still use this same Walbro style carburetor and you can snip the inside there. You just want to make sure your jet sizes are the same. So jet it to the right size. That'll fix it. And this carburetor will solve all your problems. You won't have as many of these ethanol problems because you don't have all that intricacy of that there and those jets. Just a bad style carb. Now this carburetor, so let's say, oh well, hell, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, guess what? This Nikki carburetor here, the carb kit's $71.82 if you get an OEM carb kit for this thing. Now the aftermarket Walbro 594, 593 carburetor as a whole, $28.99. Now we replace a lot of these every year because I can't stand this Nikki design. Now if people want me to rebuild them, I will, but I really don't like to do it at all. It's one of those things where you learn over the years after you rebuild so many of them and do so many things that you probably shouldn't be messing with that whatsoever. So what we're going to do here is we're going to switch this out. We're going to drain all the gas, and then we're going to go ahead and switch this carburetor out to be a Walbro style carburetor. Now again, we do this on many different designs that helps you out a lot. Whether it's one of the power built ones, whether it's a 13.5 horse up to a 20 horse. You know, they're all going to be the same carb design. The only difference is going to be the jet size on the inside. So be careful of that. But a lot of times they're real close. So you don't want to put the wrong jet size in. Now, I believe in order to take that off, we've got to actually take the front. We're going to take this out here. I think it's a T45, I believe. We're just going to take it out enough so I can lift this up just a slight bit. And usually you take this back one out or just loose in order to get it out. It makes it a little easier, but it's not wanting to quite come. I'll take that other front one up. There we go. Gives me enough room, that way I don't have to take that whole thing apart in the back. Otherwise we'd have to get this whole tank off of here and do a bunch of other things. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can't get this thing to... Now the last time I started this, it actually did fire up, it just didn't stay running. I'm going to see if I can't get this fuel to just start draining here. We can get a gravity feed going down into my bucket and get it all fixed up. Alright, so all I was doing here, since this has a fuel pump on it, I've got a hose coming all the way down into a bucket down here at the bottom, and all I'm trying to do with that is get all the fuel out. Now you want to replace the fuel if you don't know where it came from, no matter what. You don't want to leave that fuel in there if you don't know where it came from. Always replace it. One of the biggest mistakes that people make if they're trying to work on their own stuff. They leave the fuel in. Hey, it's all got brand new carb, it's got this, that, and the other. Well, it's all fine and dandy until you have water in the fuel that's sitting in there. And these carbs are really easy to take off. It's just two 5/16 bolts that hold the carb on the front. Some of them do have like an internal Torx, like a Torx that's here on the outside that you have to use to remove these carburetors. If they do, it's usually a size 5 or 6. Can't remember exactly, but internal T5 or T6. So again, that thing looks brand new. I don't know how long it's been on there. Maybe it's been on there a little longer than I think, but we just don't like them. I'm not even gonna mess with it. It's gonna cost the customer more money for me to mess with that carburetor than it is to throw a new one on. All right, so that gasket looks good, but we're gonna go ahead and replace it anyway. We usually use the Briggs and Stratton OEM gaskets. They're just a little better. You can use the one that came with the carburetor if one came with it, but if not, 692137 will solve it. Now I did open this carburetor, make sure there were no metal shavings or dirt or debris or anything inside. That's something I recommend you do on any carburetor that you use, whether it's aftermarket or OEM. Now I am going to switch out this choke. The other choke, and I don't know if the other one was OEM or not, but this one has a lot of holes in it. Most of your chokes are going to be a little different like this, where you've only got a couple holes. So all you've got to do is just pull from the front and it'll come right out of there. Pay attention to how it comes out, and all you've got to do is throw it in the body of the other one. Now some of them are a little bit different and they'll catch and things like that, so you got to be aware of that. You want this to have good action swinging back and forth. That should be a good swing just like it is. Now we're going to go ahead and put this back together. And again, this is the same on any of these other mowers. You know, the Troy-Bilts, the Ariens, the Toros, the Husqvarna, Bolins, John Deere. You know, there's many, many others. Oh, it looks like that's bent down for some reason. I don't know if it was dropped or damaged in shipping or what, but always a good idea to pay attention to what's going on when you're installing things. That way things like that don't happen. You got to try to put that on, you're not going to have good action on it. All right. So what I like to do is I like to start off this way and go ahead and put my spring down in the smaller hole. And then go ahead and get your bigger one for your governor linkage. Put it straight up in there. Now, if you're not familiar with the choke at all, to get it down in there, all you've got to do is do that real quick now. And it just goes in the one on the end here. Swing it down in there. So that should be about what we need. Now we can tighten it back down. Again, check the oil before you start doing any of this, before you try to start any of these. A lot of times these Nickies will fail past that point, and then you'll have gas in the crankcase. You try to start it and things like that, you can ruin the flywheel key, you can do damage to the head or the valves, or you know, ruin your whole engine pretty quickly not paying attention to something like that. The oil should be checked every time before you start anything ever. So oop, I still got that on. You can hear it click. Now that's one thing to note if you're doing any testing on these whatsoever as to why it won't start. You know you're getting fuel, you still won't get any fire up. You can spray some carb cleaner down in the intake here and see if you get fire out of it. See if it fires up and works well at that point, and if it does, you know that what you're missing from the equation is going to be the fuel. Now if it doesn't fire at that point, you know that you're missing either spark or you're missing compression out of the unit. So you can go to some different areas there. If you're pulling it up on this side, at the back there is going to be a little notch. There's basically a flat piece of plastic here that sits in a little notch of a guard over on this side. You want to make sure that lines back up just so everything's right like it should be. Now these two nuts on the outside are just 7/16 nuts. Just tighten those back up. Now besides this bolt on the outside, essentially at that point we've got the carburetor all the way replaced. So what we're going to do, we're going to give this thing just a few minutes here to get back to where it should be as far as the fuel goes. That's all we're waiting on at this point, is we're waiting for that fuel to drain out completely. And you want to make sure that none of that fuel is left in there. If it's something that, you know, again, you don't know the origin of. I don't know where that fuel came from. The guy says he just replaced the carb at some point, you know, and this, that, and the other. Hey, fine, that's all great. But it's not something that I can take for granted. If I take that for granted and throw it into my new carb, if it's got water or, you know, ethanol buildup or gum or varnish in it, all it's gonna do, right back in the same boat, and that customer is gonna want me to cover that because I didn't take care of it to begin with. So we're gonna let this drain here for just a minute. After it's finished draining, we'll come back, get this all finished, hooked back up, and get this thing taken care of. I'm gonna go ahead and tighten these down real quick. Just the front too with the T45. I think I'm using a T40 at this point actually, but I do believe that, yeah, it's a little sloppy in there, so I'm gonna use that T45. Now you can test your governor linkage here, make sure you're getting good spring out of it. So if you, after you got all this together, normally you'll go ahead and test the choke. It'll have a pusher from the backside that hooks onto the linkage, and you'll want it to push to choke, and then it should spring back by itself. But this one's got a lever on the outside. But the choke here, or the throttle plate, you should make sure that moves freely. If it doesn't move freely, you know you have an issue with something somewhere. So basically that hooks into there along with your spring, and then it goes over to the other side and hooks up there also. So that's going to be the same on the majority of the units, but again, the other, like on the mowers and stuff, they're going to have a, I'll show you on one of these other ones, they're going to have a plate that pushes. So on the choke, there's a rod on the back side here, and that rod comes over here. So what happens is when this comes up, it pushes your choke close. So when that rod pushes, your choke closes. And it should spring back though. As soon as you let go, as soon as that throttle goes down here, it's gonna spring back. The throttle there springs back, and then that'll close, but it pushes it to close the choke. So a couple different designs on these, but for the most part, exactly the same thing, whether it's at Power Built, private labeled, or your Briggs and Stratton. So as soon as this gets finished draining, we'll be right back to get finished up. Alright, so we're pretty well done draining, I think. Everything's good as far as that goes. I'm going to show you a little bit more about the jets and what you should do with that. So that's the main jet of the unit, and that's the jet I talk about when you say you want to jet them. Now, what you can do, these are micro drill bits. They've got different sizes. What you can do is you can take a micro drill bit and figure out what size easily fits through. So it's the second to largest one I've got here, which is a .038, which is what came out of that Nikki carb. Now, I don't know what carb that came out of. It wasn't the one that he just replaced this with. I don't know where this one came from. But if you're doing one on like a 12 or 13 horse motor, you want to pay very good attention that this jet size, it's not a whole lot bigger. Otherwise, you can feed your unit way too much fuel and cause some issues. But, wow, I don't know why that's stuck on there real well, but you can do the same thing down through here with the main jet in the Walbro style. Now, we'll take these out one at a time and just see which one fits. Now that fits real well. Dropped it there. You got to be careful with these. These are expensive drill bit sets. I guess I wouldn't say expensive, about 20 bucks. Yeah, so that's about perfect. It may go even just a tiny bit bigger, and I've got some bigger sets, but you want to figure out what size that jet is in there and what size came out of your unit, because you don't want to go too much bigger than what was in there originally. Again, otherwise you can cause an issue with that. So be mindful of that. You can use micro drill bits. There's a lot of different ways that you can do those, but just wanted to show you that real quick. And then as far as the testing on the solenoid goes, if you're having issues with fuel supply, what you can do is you can take your solenoid off, and you can go ahead and hook it up, and as soon as you turn it on, you should see that flip down. So that flips down each time it goes on. Now there's a ground here that just goes back to the case, and then there's a positive wire that comes through. You should be getting 12 volts to those whenever your ignition is on, whether it's on a riding mower or this generator here. That should work every time, in and out. So it should not stick. It should go up pretty much immediately. If it does stick, you're having issues at that point. Now, again, I was talking about replacing the carburetor with one that did not have, so some of these Nikkis, now this one's just removed, but some of them do not have the solenoid on the bottom of them. So if they don't, and you're trying to use one of these Walbro style carburetors to replace it, just because that Nikki is a garbage carburetor and very expensive for what it is, if you're going to use that to replace it, all you're going to do is you're going to pull this out, you're going to pull your solenoid out, and you're just going to snip this. So you're going to take a pair of, usually we take a pair of pair of snips, and we're just going to snip that little nipple off there, because you're not going to send any voltage to it. There's not going to be any hookups on it, and that's just your afterfire solenoid. All that controls is when you turn off your unit, it shoots up to block off your main jet in the unit. So that's all it does, blocks that main jet, so your unit can't get any fuel anymore. So let's hook this thing back up and see what we got. Everything should be good. I'm just snipping that fuel line a little bit because the other one came off at an angle. Came off straight. This one comes off at an angle. I'm not sure that I like that fuel line. I think that's probably, oh, it is too, some of that stuff that probably came with this carburetor. Now if you get some of that fuel line comes with your carb, do not use it. It's just garbage. So he's got a couple pieces of that there. I'm going to go ahead and replace those real quick. Otherwise it's going to just completely deteriorate in a very short period of time, and never a bad idea to go ahead and replace your filter while you're here too. Now we use Oregon 07-101 filter is what we use for these. Cut that here back to size. Now I guess he probably wants his fuel shut off on there too, so which is all fine. Let's see here. Never a bad idea to have a fuel shut off on it either. It does make it easier to clear the carb out if you're trying to store it or anything like that. We use Continental fuel line. It is good quality, good price. It's good to about 50 psi, I believe is what they rate it to. Some of the other stuff is just kind of garbage. It doesn't last. Gets real brittle real quick, so we like to stay away from that as much as we can. There for a while it was kind of hard to get. Shortage on it for some reason or another. Okay, so back at it. Now some of these, when you take them apart, they do have a screw that goes from the top to the housing depending on the design of the housing up here, so you want to be mindful of that if you're trying to take it apart and it won't come off. Let's see, we're going to throw some fuel in it real quick and fire it on up. Now we use ethanol-free treated fuel. We treat it with Phaser 3000 just to keep any of the moisture content down. If it accumulates any moisture, it gets broken down back through the fuel as opposed to pooling at the bottom. It helps out a lot. But the ethanol free is the main key with doing any of this. Go ahead and choke it. Now we're getting good AC voltage to the panel there, but the DC is only running at like 7.88 volts or something like that, so I'm not sure exactly what's going on there. I'll contact the customer and see if he wants me to address that at all, but 9 times out of 10 people don't use the float charger or the 12 volts out anyway. But again, not really sure what's going on with that, but we're getting good AC voltage out on the other side, which is great. Carburetor's been replaced, everything here is solid, the whole system's solid, and this thing's ready for some action. So that should get you ready to go, whether you're fixing your generator, whether you're fixing your mower, no matter the case on these engines, that'll get you all back into action. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe.